My name is Christine Muir. I'm the community librarian at Cary Library. Thank you all for coming this morning to the Discover Your Home's History program. If anyone needs assistive listening devices, there are some on the side table. Please help yourself. We do have Lex Media recording this event today. It will be made available on their website and their channel, and we're hoping to also have a circulating copy in our collection so that anybody who misses today's program can catch it later. So if you don't want to be recorded in any way, just let me know afterwards. Sorry. On your seat, you have a program with an index card inside it and a pencil. The purpose of those index cards is so that if you think of a question during one of our presentations, you can jot it down. Our presenters have worked really hard to pull together this material, and they're all volunteering their time. So I don't want to interrupt them with questions. I want to let them go through the flow of their presentation. But I don't want you to forget your questions either. So jot down any questions, and when we take a break between presenters and a Q&A afterwards, another woman and I will collect the questions, and then we'll read them out at the end. I would ask for you to silence your cell phones if you haven't already done so. This program is part of the 150th anniversary celebration for Cary Library. On the side table, we have some postcards outlining other events that will be occurring over the next few months, so please help yourself and join us for more activities later. And also we have an exhibit upstairs in the Piper Gallery, which is right across from the reference desk, and it kind of celebrates the whole 150 years leading up to this moment. So if you have some time after the program, please check it out. We worked really hard to put that together, and there's a lot to be proud of in this library's history, so please take a look. And I'm almost done. Today's program is sponsored by the Friends of Cary Memorial Library. We're so lucky to have such a wonderful group of friends who've provided some hospitality, who helped me coordinate this program, and who just support the library in so many wonderful ways through the year. Thank you to the Friends. And with that, I'm going to introduce the president of the Friends of Cary Library, Laurel Cooley.
Thank you, Christine. And good morning, everyone. Good morning. Back in 1989, a group of citizens came together to create Friends of Cary Memorial Library. They brought about an all-volunteer, member and service-based charitable organization formed to support this vibrant library in this historic community. Ever since, Friends continues to run book sales, operate a gently used bookstore up on the main level, and also a children's book cart across the hallway. We underwrite annual summer reading programs for all ages, the Read It Now, See It Now collection on the main level, and also the popular Museum Pass program, which offers discounted admission to more than 20 area museums and cultural organizations. Friends of Cary promotes literacy, reading, and storytelling. Homes here in Lexington have stories to tell, and they're waiting to be uncovered. This morning, our panelists will bring home history to life and help you find answers. Before we begin, I'd like to mention that our hospitality table is open and ready to serve coffee, tea, and light refreshments. And please stop by the table and also stop by the table as well as a side table that has available takeaways just before our question and answer session. And now I'd like to introduce, as our first speaker, Ann Grady.
So, as I say, I'm talking about the history of housing in Lexington over time, and I don't have much time, so it's going to be a hit the highlights.
Thank you.
Okay. This will not be a compendium of architectural styles in Lexington, because that has already been done expertly, and it is posted on the Lexington Cultural Resources Survey, about which you will be hearing next. I will be focusing on settlement patterns as the town's housing stock grew from 30 houses in 1682 to over 11,000 today. But I've chosen to talk about only 10 developments. These are the ones that you see on the screen in the interests of time. I did identify 58 developments, which is surely not the total number, but I will be illustrating the talk with references to the architectural styles in the various developments. In the 17th and 18th century, the majority of houses were associated with family farms, and so most houses were scattered around Lexington. Historian Mary Furr has documented that in 1771 there were 130 farms. Each farm needed approximately 60 acres to sustain a family. Well into the 20th century, Lexington was still a farm-based economy, though the number of farms was rapidly diminishing. The earliest surviving house is the core of the Beckman Tavern, recently dated by dendrochronology, or tree ring dating, to 1710. It's an example of what is known as the first period architecture. Oh, do I get full screen? Yeah, okay.
Yep, there you go.
Okay, so I just
Yep.
got it.
Sorry.
That's okay. So anyway, the Beckman Tavern has the oldest core in town, and it was dated to 1710. And you see an example of what it looked like at that period, and also a view of the kitchen in which you can still see the exposed framing, which was a characteristic of the post-medieval architecture that from England that the style was based on. This one also has some decorative painting, which we think was original, although it was also reproduced in the 1920s. There are 3 other houses with similar cores that date to around 1716 in Lexington. As the 18th century progressed, Georgian and then Federal-style buildings derived from classical Renaissance architecture prevailed. There are now about 30 relatively stylish 18th century houses in these styles in town. They were owned, no doubt, by the wealthiest owners in town. One example is the Hancock Clark House, built in 1737, that housed the 2 ministers who served Lexington in the 18th century. Because of its association with the Battle of Lexington, it's the best preserved house of the period. And it includes this gorgeous woodwork in one of the rooms. Another example is the Beckman Tavern, which by 1750 had grown to look like this Georgian mansion. And the house at 5 Harrington Road is an example of the Federal style. It's a given that the finer houses are the ones that survive, and that gives us a somewhat skewed picture of houses of our ancestors. Most of the 158 dwellings known to exist in 1813 were of a different sort, the kind that doesn't tend to survive. Here is how these ordinary houses were remembered at the end of the 19th century. The inhabitants of those days had little means for luxury or show. They were industrious and prudent, and their buildings were in harmony with their lives. The local builders were not much inclined to the ornate, but rather favored economy and utility, with no architect involved other than the carpenter. Very few of the dwellings were ever painted, and those that were, with only one coat applied at the time of building, and the general appearance of all the buildings was one of neglect. Well, most of Lexington had widely scattered houses associated with farms. Houses also tended to be built along the main road through town, what we know today as Massachusetts Avenue, and after 1800, along the turnpikes at the edge of town, along Concord Avenue and Lowell Street. I don't know if that shows up on this. Here's the center of town. This is Lowell Street, and this is Concord Avenue. And that is a map from 1830 by J.G. Hales. Beginning in 1830, housing was developed in specific areas as a result of certain events, or by individuals deciding to subdivide their land into building lots. The subdivision could be lots on a single street, or hundreds of lots on multiple streets. A list of the developments through 1980 will be posted on the library's website, I believe. When you see the date that your area was developed, it's likely that your house was built after that date. And now I'll discuss 10 examples of developments that I have chosen to show you. The first development was the construction of some 30 houses of similar plan in East Lexington along Mass Avenue in the early 1830s. Eli Robbins ran a very successful fur dressing business that employed over 100 people. Thanks to him, we have the significant concentration of similar houses. Of Robbins, it was said, no one ever contributed more to the making of Main Street, which was what the street was called then. Many of the large shade trees were set out by him, and many of the buildings he erected. His lands were always available for sale at reasonable prices, and in every possible way he was ever ready to lend a helping hand to others. The Greek Revival style of architecture in town made its first appearance there. Robbins built what is known as the Stone Building in 1833 as a lecture hall. Isaac Melvin, a builder turned architect, designed the building. He turned to two architectural books of 1830 and 1833 by Asher Benjamin for the decorative features of the stone building, as shown in this comparison of the doorway of the stone building and a design in the 1833 book. Melvin also may have played a role in the creation of 7 doorways in East Lexington that were also drawn from these books. Melvin would go on to design other buildings in Lexington and the region. The next development was prompted by the coming of the railroad to Lexington in 1846. Hancock Street pre-existed, but its proximity to the railroad station, now the headquarters of the Lexington Historical Society in Depot Square, made it desirable. And Hancock Street shortly became the locus of stylish houses built by wealthy owners. Thus, it became known as the Court End of Lexington. One was the General Samuel Chandler House, built in 1846 and designed by Isaac Melvin in the Italianate style, loosely drawn from Italian villa architecture that was promoted in architectural books. Naturally, the number of developments tended to parallel population growth in Lexington. The highest population growth rate ever was between 1946 and 1960, when the number of people living in town increased by 130%. And there was a similar increase in the total number of houses. This was a result of the great demand for housing after World War II for returning veterans from the war, increasing suburbanization in general, farmers deciding to sell their land, and the prospect of commuting on Route 128, which was in the process of being built. It is estimated that 30% of the current housing was built in the 1950s. Although most people bought lots and built homes on them to their own requirements, some houses in the late 19th century were built speculatively. The first were 5-story-and-a-half cottages with mansard roofs built by John L. Norris on Hancock Avenue off Hancock Street in the early 1870s, similar in design to a design shown in Bicknell's Village Builder of 1872. What am I doing wrong? Yeah. Okay. Two local builders, David Tuttle and Abraham Washburn, frequently built speculatively. Tuttle built 4 houses on Hancock Street for himself and then sold them, including this Italianate structure at 40 Hancock Street, built in 1847. Abraham Washburn enlarged, what am I doing? Oh, okay. His own house at 36 Forest Street in the stick style in 1896, based on a design in the Scientific American Architects and Builders edition of October 1886. He built the same house for someone else on Highland Avenue. Who knows if they were ever painted as shown in the magazine? By the 1870s, Lexington was known as a particularly healthful town in which to vacation. It is true that as part of the escarpment west of Boston, the town escaped pollution in Boston caused by burning coal. In 1873, the southern part of Miriam Hill was laid out in 33 house lots. Beginning in the 1880s, the area began to be built up. The relatively wealthy owners built substantial houses in the styles such as the shingle style, Colonial Revival, and Queen Anne, many of them designed by architects for the first time. Similar houses were built on Bloomfield Street, Monroe Hill, and Winthrop Road into the early 20th century. By 1889, a number of people who first vacationed in hotels and went on to build summer residences eventually became year-round residents. This decade was also when the newcomers, many of whom were professionals who commuted to Boston by train, began to change the town from a farming community into a progressive suburb. 2 houses on Oakland Street were built by friends who had previously summered in Lexington. George S. Jackson, whose Queen Anne-style house was at number 17, chose to commemorate his move to a leafy suburb by enshrining part of Emerson's poem, My Garden, in a stained glass window. The poem speaks to the motivation of many of the newcomers. If I could put my words to song and tell what's there enjoyed, all men would to my garden throng and leave the cities void. Oh, I see. Beginning in the late 1890s, others were laying out small house lots. Yeah, I got it. to provide housing for in Lexington for those who commuted by streetcar, which came in 1899, including Meagerville, Liberty Heights, and areas on Massachusetts Avenue in East Lexington. This is a house on Liberty Heights built in the bungalow style in 1928. In response to the population growth in the 1920s, the Manor section off of Mass Avenue in West Lexington was laid out in 1921. The largest subdivision ever at 298 house lots, the Manor brochure stressed that residential zoning would keep out unwanted development. Zoning had been established in Lexington only 10 years earlier. The brochure also states, you owe it to your children to own your own home, where you can be independent. Many smaller houses were built in areas opened up for development in the 1920s and 30s. Some were based on designs promoted by the government's Small House Bureau, such as this one at 43 Hayes Avenue. Between 1940 and 1950, Wellington Estates, a very interesting development of houses designed by Royal Barry Wills, who was known for his promotion of the Cape Cod-style house, were built in North Lexington, adjacent to what would become Route 128. The houses were reproductions of various colonial styles. Other houses by Wills are scattered around Lexington. Post-World War II developments included the Woodhaven section that was laid out in lots and intended to be purchased by veterans with a GI Bill. What became known as Sun Valley consisted of 200 houses built adjacent to the Winchester line in 1950. A smaller but architecturally significant group of houses were built in the mid-century modern style in 9 neighborhoods in Lexington. While most of the houses in this style at the time were custom, these neighborhoods offered the advantages of a modern house at an affordable price. One was Peacock Farm, developed by Walter Pierce and Danforth Common, where the majority of houses were of the Peacock farmhouse style, a split-level modern house that won awards. Subsequently, this house was built between 1960 and 1966 at the Glen, the Grove, Rumford Road, Upper Turning Mill, and Pleasant Brook by developers Green and White, who acquired the rights to the plan from Pierce. I'm not sure how many developments that I have cited have neighborhood associations. I can think of 7. I'd be interested to hear of more. Invariably, these associations lead to more interactions with neighbors and a greater sense of community. For most of these developments, you can read more in the Lexington Cultural Resources Survey. And now I'd like to it's my pleasure to introduce Marilyn Fenolosa.
Before I start talking about my favorite website, I want to unravel one of Lexington's biggest mysteries. What on earth is the difference between the Historic Districts Commission, the Historical Commission, and Historical Society? 3 different organizations, 2 governmental, 1 private. The HDC was established in 1956 by a special act of the legislature. We were the 3rd historic district in the Commonwealth after Nantucket and Beacon Hill. The HDC has regulatory authority to approve all exterior changes in the historic districts, there are 4 of them, basically up and down Mass Ave with a spur off Hancock Street. That means any demolition, construction, exterior renovation, color changes, signs, anything you do to the front of your house if you're in a district that could be seen from a public way, and public way includes things like the bike path, has to be approved by the HDC before you can do anything. Contrast that with the Historical Commission. It was established in 1975 when town meeting adopted a state enabling statute that said if you want to have a Historical Commission, this is how you do it. The Historical Commission is primarily educational, We establish and maintain the inventory, which we're going to talk about in a second, programs like this. And we also administer the town's demolition delay bylaw. This is a bylaw that says if your house is listed in the inventory, then before you can tear it down, we will have to have a hearing to determine whether it's preferably preserved and whether it can be preserved. And if it can, and it is, then we may impose a 12-month moratorium on demolition to help you find, to give you time to find preservation alternatives. The Historical Society is just what it is. It is a private organization, a membership organization. We have a speaker here from the society today. Established in 1886. I think the oldest in the country? No, not the oldest, an old one. It owns and manages the town's 3 18th century museum houses, the Hancock Clark House, Monroe, and Beckman, although Beckman is actually owned by the town, but managed under long-term lease by the society. It has extensive archives, publications for sales, programs. That's the difference. 2 are regulatory, 1 is private. All right. This is where you start when you want to find out anything at all about your home in Lexington. Note the website, Historic Survey at lexingtonmat.gov. This is the homepage of the Comprehensive Cultural Resources Survey, which a lot of people call the CRS, which is, I just heard that referred to last week, but it is what we call the inventory. You can also get to this page from the Historical Commission's website on the town's webpage. The first thing you should do is go down to the master index to the inventory. And this is a list of all of the houses and properties and structures that have been documented. If it's on that list, there's probably research on it on the website. This is what the front of it, the homepage of that looks like. It's a PDF, so it'll download on your computer. And, let me just back up for a second. The list is going to incorporate all areas of towns, all dates up to about 1940, all styles, not just 1775, not just the historic districts, but probably your house too. If your house isn't in the inventory, if it's not on this list, there are other ways to find out about it, and you're going to hear about that later on this morning. If it should be on the inventory, because you know things that we don't, we hope you'll tell us, and we'll put you on the list for the next time we go around. Okay, we have all arbitrarily chosen a house in Lexington for illustrative purposes, and the house we picked was the Cutler Farm at 503 Concord Ave. So if you click, it's in alphabetical order, you will see Concord Ave. There is an entry for Concord Ave. Hooray. So you go back to the home page, and there is this thing called scanned survey forms. And they're scanned survey forms that were produced and filed with the Massachusetts Historical Commission under their standards. There are area forms, individual forms, and objects and structures. An object would be like the obelisk on the green. So if you click on individual forms, you will get to an alphabetical list of all of the properties. You scroll down to Concord Ave, and there it is, number 503. If you click on 503, you'll get the form itself. This is, again, a PDF that you can download to your computer. This is what the form looks like. The front page of it has information about the date of construction, the style, the architect or builder, alterations, square footage, setting, and then the following pages describe architectural and historic significance, including a bibliography. There are also often additional photos of the house. This form is actually fairly comprehensive. It was done in 1984. It tells you that, just briefly, that the Cutler farmhouse was owned, and the property was owned by Ebenezer White. In the 18th century, it was sold in 1789 to a Mr. Underwood, who sold the lot to his son in 1804. The house was probably built around that time, 1804. Later, it was sold to Thomas Cutler, who sold it again to his son in 1802 to his son, later, Nathaniel Cutler was a prosperous farmer, raising and selling large quantities of herbs and dealing in lumber. He was a 19th century Norm Cohen. He was active in town affairs. He served as moderator, selectman, district school committee man, surveyor of highways, overseer of poor, surveyor of lumber, and a member of various special town committees. I hope I don't embarrass you.
Where did that come from?
Later, it was sold to his son Thomas, who was a farmer specializing in apples and milk. So there's lots and lots of good information about the Cutlers on this form. Some of them aren't quite so fancy. The inventory was started in 1975 as a project of the bicentennial, and the really, really, really earliest don't have much information. We've tried to update them over the years, and hopefully, if your house is in here, if it's not updated again, I hope you'll contact us, and we'll see what we can do. So there's the form with all the stuff I was talking about. Back. You'll notice up in the corner of this form, it says it's in Area T. Well, what does that mean? Up here. Yep. T. That means there's a neighborhood description as well as an individual property description. So if you go back to our home page, back to that scanned survey, we were just here. Now we want to be in area forms. Clicking on area forms gets you to all of the forms. It's something like A through AW. There's a lot of neighborhoods. And if you scroll down to T, you'll see that Area T is Concord Avenue. Clicking on that will get you, again, to a Massachusetts Historical Commission form on the neighborhood. The form will describe, again, architectural and historical significance of the neighborhood. It will provide a bibliography as well as a map, more research, and other interesting information. Click on again, this is a PDF. And for example, in this particular case, that is the Parker pine. The Parker pine was planted in the area by Theodore Parker, the grandson of Captain John Parker. Lots of little tidbits. When in 2010 we put the inventory online, we also updated our area summaries. And these updates have additional information, colored photos. If you click through this area summary entry, again, you'll get the same list. Go down to T, again for Concord Avenue. And then this is the kind of information that you will find under there. So this will tell you what was going on in your neighborhood during the time your house was built, and after. Okay. A couple other things. What was going on in the town when your house was built? Well, that might be interesting. Go back to the all-site map, which is you can get to from that first page, and there is an entry that you cannot read, but I will tell you. It says period summaries, and I think this is period summaries. This house, built in 1804, it was in the federal period, 1775 to 1830. If you click on that, you will get a description of what was happening in Lexington during the federal period. Okay. Another way to look at determine your house's history is by looking at period maps. We are so lucky that Cary Library has almost a complete collection, complete? Pretty much, of maps that were developed over the years for various purposes and by various parties. So if you click on period maps, you get a list of what we have. And Anne has showed you this one. I'm going to show you a very not so wonderful copy of the same thing that Anne showed you, but the earliest house that would show an 1804 house is in 1830. So if you want to confirm to yourself that there was such a thing, you go to the map, and right down there is the dot that represents the Cutler farmhouse. We know that the house was standing in at least 1830 and probably before. If you want to find out if the house was standing in 1850, in 1875, there's a series of maps on that website that you can follow your houses down. And you can also see the development of your neighborhood, because right now there's this very tiny little dot, but there's not much else going on out here. That changes very quickly. And that's it. All right. Okay, one other thing, and Anne has kind of described this. Anne told you that this house, that there is something called the federal style. And in fact, it said that on the area form. Well, what is the federal style? We have an architectural style guide on the website. And if you click on that, that's the cover page of it, you'll get an index of styles of all of the houses that we've identified in Lexington. The federal style is right there on page 8. If you go to that page, you will see there is a drawing of a federal style house, an architectural drawing, plus some things to look for. So as a backup, you say, well, are there elaborate fan doorways with side lights? Anne showed you some pictures of houses. And we will too, in the style guide. We will show you various houses in Lexington that were built during the federal style, during that period. So, armed with this information, you can determine a lot about your house. You can see pictures, you can see history, you can see trends, and it's a great way to start. So, happy hunting, and if you ever have any questions at all about the Cultural Resources Inventory, please give the Historical Commission a call. Thank you.
I have brought a couple things to share with you because nothing would be more fun than doing some show and tell in the library. So I'm going to be talking about the resources we have here, and I have brought quite a few examples of materials from the Worthen collection and the library collection. I hope there'll be time for you to take a look at some of those, because it's more fun to look at the things than just hear about them. And I've also put on the table, there's a one-page double-sided listing of some of the resources that we use the most in the library. All right, so I'm going to give you an overview of some of the resources that Cary Library has to help you learn about the history of your house. And to do that, I'm going to walk through the process we might go with you, whether it's to get you started on your own research or to work with you in person, online, or on the phone. So let's say you've contacted the reference desk for some assistance. And I'm going to try this. There we go. You might have one of these questions or something a little bit different. What we want to do first is understand your specific interests. Are you looking for information on when the house was built, what it looked like, what used to be there, what life was like in Lexington when your house was built, etc.? Because understanding what you're really looking for is going to help us figure out what resources we're going to tap into. We're going to help you use two different catalogs. One you're probably very familiar with, the Minuteman Library Network, that's going to help us find library materials. And if you're not familiar with this, we're also going to look at the Worthen virtual exhibit, which is Worthen collection materials. These were donated to the library by the Worthen family in 1976. They are a range of wonderful object slides, maps, photographs, etc. Focus is probably 1850 to 1950, 1870 to 1950, that time frame. And we catalog them. In fact, Lee and I worked on this together over many, many months of cataloging and organizing all of the materials into an online virtual exhibit that is absolutely great. Because Mr. Worthen Sr. especially was interested in who lived where when, we have a lot of information that we can share with you. I think it's going to be a great resource. Okay, but first, we always start with our favorite resource, which is the Cultural Resources Survey. And I'm just calling it the CRS going forward. If your address is listed, fingers crossed it is, it makes it very, very easy for us as a starting point to help you learn more about your home. If it's not listed, it still gives us opportunities for research. It's all about the clues we're going to look for. And Marilyn talked a little bit about the individual building forms and the area forms and the area and period summaries. We're going to look for clues in all these places. Because we're going to consider not just your address, but the houses near you, your neighborhood, the area. Once we have these clues, then we'll look in the Worthen and library catalogs. So what kind of clues am I talking about? Marilyn pointed this example out to you, 503 Concord Ave. What kind of clues do we get? Well, we know Concord Ave, Area T, Cutler family, 1804. That gives us some dates to get started. We also, there's information on the Concord Turnpike, names of specific people in the White, Underwood, and Cutler families, mention of the dairy business, and milkmen. We're going to keep those keywords in mind. There's also, every one of these forms has a list of references, and they're absolutely fantastic to help us look further. In this case, the library has the Marjorie Cutler Burgess book on the genealogy of the Cutler family. And also in Hudson's History, Volume 2, are going to be genealogies of this and other families. And one last thing that really popped out at me for our purposes, we know after World War II that the farmland was divided up into several residential developments, one of which is 5 Fields. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about 5 Fields in just a minute. But what if your exact address isn't on that list? Then we're going to go to the area forms, which Marilyn also pointed out to you. We're going to look for clues there. And the clues we get from the area form, again, history of the Cambridge-Concord Turnpike, and a mention of quite a few addresses about families and properties, many of which are still there. I love this part of town. I live just over the line in Waltham, so Concord Ave is one of my favorite places. We get a lot of clues here. On one end, we've got the Parker Homestead at 187 Spring Street near 128. On the other end, we've got the Benjamin Wellington family home at 177 Concord Ave. And in between, we've got the homes of Underwood Foster families at 353, Wellington Smith Packard, that's a different Wellington related probably, at 272 Concord Ave. So we can look at those. We also note that there's an area along Concord Ave and Waltham Street known as Smith's End or Kite End, so that's something we're going to take a look at. And again, mention of the dairy industry and milkmen. And again, some fabulous references. In this case, 2 papers given by Bradford Smith to the Historical Society, one on Kite End and one on Concord Turnpike. And there's also one by George Smith about the milk business in Lexington. So we can get a lot of information out of these references from the form. We've also got Edwin Worthen's Calendar History of Lexington and quite a few maps, most of which we probably have here in either the Cary Library or the Worthen collection. So what do we do with all these clues? Now we're going to search the library catalog and the Worthen virtual exhibit. I do want to mention, though, that these two catalogs are not necessarily organized by address. We may find an address in the Worthen collection, but we instead are going to search using names, keywords, and concepts. So that's something that's very different from what you're going to find the Historical Commission's site and the Historical Society that Elizabeth will point out in a few minutes. The other thing I wanted to note is that not everything is going to show up in the library catalog. So one example from Mr. Worthen's book on tracing the past in Lexington, you're not going to find on the catalog record the names of any families. You're not going to find Cutler listed there. We'd need to look at the book, look in the index. But it's a fabulous resource for any properties in Southwest Lexington or East Village. So we're going to look for clues there. All right, so I'm going to show you a couple of examples. I'm not going to go live with these searches. It seemed more efficient to do it this way. So I talked about 5 fields. That's a separate form, even though it's in the Concord Ave area. It's actually a separate form. There's a lot of information about the history of this area on the individual form. It's one of several mid-century modern neighborhoods in Lexington. But when I go look in the library catalog, I find all kinds of things, and I have broad examples of some of the materials here. We have organized vertical files into about 60 different subject binders here in the library, 2 of which, Lexington Organizations and Lexington Properties, include articles and newspaper clippings on 5 fields. So that would be one place we'd want to look. We also have publications by and about 5 Fields residents. We have 2 of their newsletters, and we have a set of interviews with owners. We also have a collection of research papers done by Lexington High School students. One student wrote a paper on 5 Fields, and there are papers written by students on other areas of town. And the thing that's nice about those papers, not only are they summaries, but they include footnotes and citations. You know, if the student wanted to get an A, they had to include that information, so it makes it easy for us then to follow up in the Minuteman or wherever else they got their information. Not in the catalog, though, are so many maps. I'm going to show you just a few, and I brought just a few up. Maps are an excellent resource. When is your property not there, but when does it show up, for example? And also, I want to mention Tom Soleil's book, Historical Guide to Open Space. He includes the history of every conservation area in Lexington. You wouldn't necessarily know that the Juniper Hill Conservation Area is right next to 5 Fields. But that's something librarians could help you understand and read more about that. All right, so a couple of searches. Let's say one more search. Based on the information we might have gotten from the area form, we know there were quite a few farms along Concord Ave and in Lexington and in the Kite End area. So this is one of these vertical file collections of materials. I've highlighted just a few of the farms that do show up in that binder. And I believe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Wilson Farm is the only remaining existing farm. So there's a lot of information, though, on what used to be farms, and your house may very well be on land that used to be. So that's a great resource. We love looking at those. Okay, so that's just 2 examples. Then there's the Worthen collection. This is a virtual exhibit that you can search from home. It is organized into 6 smaller collections: lantern slides, maps, photographs, documents, objects, and newspapers. You can search the entire site for a keyword or a concept that you've come across, or you can search the individual smaller collections. You can also browse through each collection or look through the table of contents. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. let's assume that we're looking for the family name Wellington. And let's assume that we looked in the slides and I found, this is kind of hard to read, sorry. We have a slide for the Wellington estate on Concord Ave. Mr. Worthen wrote a little narrative for each of the slides, so it's going to give you some background information. And I'll show you in a minute how you can enlarge the photo. But I wanted to point out, and this is from the Cultural Resources Survey, the farm began a new career when it became Minutemen Golf Club. And then in 1952, the clubhouse was remodeled back into a residence and the former farmland used for housing developments. So that's a great clue. We would follow up on that. And if I click on the thumbnail, it gives me an image of the farm, and I believe that's from the 1870s. Another example, let's assume we're looking in the maps collection for the family name Cutler. There are 2 maps that include that name. I've brought a couple of them here. The map from Worthen's Tracing the Past book is one of the maps, and it also includes the name of Parker, Wellington, and Smith, a few other people living in that area. And speaking of maps, I wanted to highlight, excuse me, I'm going to go on my read here. Well, it was a little bit, but I lost this, okay. I wanted to highlight our maps collection just for a minute. We don't have a full run of every type of map for every year, but I really, this is one of our hidden gems. And any librarian could help you sit down and go through these maps and find either your exact house or what the property used to be. I really would encourage you to, you can do a lot of your own research in the library's website or on the Worthen virtual exhibit. But we would love to work with you. I say we, I'm retired. We would love to work, we would love to work with you looking through these maps, and once you get started on the maps, you just kind of go crazy with them because they are an awful lot of fun. All right, so I wanted to kind of take a sidestep and mention those. Okay, and one more example from the Worthen collection. Let's say that we're looking in the photos collection and we've searched on the words kite end, because that was one of the clues we got from the area form. There's a grouping of photos of those properties taken in 1942, and I want to highlight 2 of them. One is the Packard Farm, what Mr. Worthen calls the Packard Farm at 272 Concord Ave. The Cultural Resources Survey would call it the Wellington Smith Packard House. So that's another reason why we like to gather these clues together, because the names aren't necessarily the same, and Mr. Worthen doesn't include the address, 272 Concord Ave. So that's one example. That wall is still there, by the way. I love this. The other would be the Foster House at 353 Concord Ave. This is the CRS calls it the Joseph Underwood House. So again, another reason to check the details. This is the same Joseph Underwood as the 503 Concord Ave property at Cutler Farm. So there's a lot of great information. It's really fun. I went a little overboard just looking at all these places because it's near where I live and it's fun. And that wall is still there. The property is still there. Okay, so just an overview, excuse me, of how you might approach this project. Start with the Cultural Resources Survey for clues, whether your address is, fingers crossed, an individual building form. But also look at the area forms, the area summaries, and the period summaries for any clues we can find, because the library catalog and the Worthen virtual exhibit don't necessarily have street addresses. So the more clues we can find, the better. We'll also identify additional resources that we might not find in the library catalog. As I mentioned, we only catalog to a certain level, so some really important information might not be in the catalog, but librarians, and I do still work part-time, librarians can help you find that. And then finally, we'll also consider other resources, the Historical Society's website and staff. Elizabeth's going to talk a little bit more about that. The town archives, town departments, there's going to be a lot of information. We can point you in the right direction to some of those other resources. Middlesex County Register of Deeds. There's a lot of places. Some of the key resources we have at Cary Library and in the Worthen Collection that may not show up in the catalog or may. General histories like Hudson's 2 volumes. Special materials, I mentioned a few of these. The Historical Society papers, the high school student papers, our vertical files. The Minuteman, we have that here on microfilm and more recently online. The maps, I've just given you a highlight of those, and I do have quite a few over here. Photographs and slides, especially in the Worthen Collection. Genealogies, Hudson's Volume 2, some family histories. We've got vital records of many Massachusetts cities and towns. Directories, we've got street listings, phone books. We've got lists of taxpayers. We've got the town annual reports, which also are online. Planning and zoning studies. There's the assessor's database. Lots of ways you can find out more about the history of your home. And you can do a lot of it yourself online, but librarians are always happy to help you. We love this kind of question, this kind of research. We don't get it often enough. So we hope you'll contact us. You can stop by the reference desk and we'll get you started. You can call us to ask a quick question or make an appointment, or send an email to askcarrie@midlib.net to ask more in-depth questions or to make an appointment, and we look forward to working with you.
So I'm from the Historical Society Archives, so I'm going to show you what we have on houses in the archives. And most of what we have in terms of information on particular houses is going to be photographs. You can find some information, additional information on houses if it's listed in the photographs record and descriptions. And we do occasionally have other materials on houses, such as family records or architectural blueprints. But for the most part, the archival records are going to be helpful if you're looking for photographs of your house specifically. So we get questions from people all the time looking for information on their houses. I've gotten requests from people who are trying to replicate a garden in the front of their house, and they wanted to know what it looked like historically. Or from people who are renovating their house and wanted to know what, make it as close to the original facade as possible. Or just people doing research on their house for their own personal interest, just to learn more about where they live. So to help with these kinds of requests and to make it easy for people to see the photos that we have of their houses and other buildings in town that might be relevant or interesting or they'd be doing research on, we are currently in the process of putting as many of these photographs online as possible. As a side note, we're doing this with a lot of our collections, but this is obviously the one that's going to be most relevant to your research. So you can visit our online collections from your home computer, rather than having to come into the archives physically, which can sometimes be tricky if you work a 9-to-5 job, since we're really only open on weekdays around that time as well. And we aren't open on weekends. So this is really easy to do from home. And the website that you would visit is lexingtonhistory.org/collections. And as a side note, you're going to notice here that if you look at the URL, it's slightly different. That's because our website for the Historical Society is .org, and this is a website that we've set up through the database we use. So we set up, I can just show you really quickly, we set up, you go to lexingtonhistory.org/collections. It's going to take you to our website and then reroute you right here. So it just makes it a little easier than having to type in this long thing. And I think we mentioned over on the side we have some materials. There's a rack card over there for the archives, and it's going to show you information about the archives, and then on the back it has this website, so if you need it. So this is our website, and it's important to note that while we currently have hundreds of photographs of houses, properties, and landmarks available for online viewing, this is only a very small percentage of our holdings in the archives. So if you are looking for a house and you don't find the address that you're looking for, please feel free to get in touch with us, and we'll take a look and see if we can find it elsewhere and if we have any information on it and if we can get it online for you to view it that way. So we're going to continue using the example of 503 Concord Avenue, just to show you what we would have. And there are two different ways to search for information in a house or building in the Lexington Society's online collections. So one thing you can do is you can scroll down here, some of our popular collections, but again, not all of them. And you can click on the Properties and Landmarks collection. So by clicking this icon, you're going to search just in this collection in the archives. And while most of the photographs we have concerning houses, buildings, and properties in Lexington will likely be found here, it's not always going to be the case. We do have photographs that are in other collections. For example, we do have some collections that are from individual photographers or families, and any photographs of houses that were from this collection originally are going to stay in that collection. So we could maybe find a photo of your house somewhere else. But this is a good place to start. So when you click on the icon, you're going to see that the collection, or you can search for the collection right here in description. So you're going to want to type out the entire word without abbreviations. So for example, never use Mass Ave or Mass.Av. Always use Massachusetts Avenue. The same goes for road or street with the abbreviations. Always type out the whole word. However, this is not case sensitive, so you don't have to worry about proper capitalizations or anything like that. So I'm going to show you, if I just search 503 Concord Avenue, I'm going to get 212 results, and that's a lot. And many of these, if you scroll down and look, are going to have nothing to do with Concord Avenue. So I want to also emphasize to please use quotation marks, because that's going to give you just what you're looking for. Otherwise, you're going to get anything that references Concord or Avenue, which is a lot of results. So if you search just with 503, you're going to get 20, and that's much more reasonable. So you can scroll down and you'll see these are all Cutler Farmhouse related. But as I mentioned, while this is a quick way to get started, it's not necessarily going to give you a comprehensive view of everything we have online. So the other way is to do a keyword search. And you're going to do the same thing with quotes. And you're going to search this way. And here you get 21. So that leads me to believe that there was one result that we have a photograph of that's not in the landmarks collection, or the photographs of the Lexington Landmarks collection. It's in another collection. So this gives me one more result than I got before. So this is maybe a little bit of a better way. So again, I searched for 503 Concord Avenue. And if I click on the first one, I'm going to see all the results in the descriptions. And if you click on it here, you can get more information on the photograph. So you can see the date. You can see if it's available. We don't always know when the photograph was taken. We can see the date. We can see the original print size. We can see, let's go down a little more, copyright if we know it. And we can also see in the last line that more information can be found in the Mass Historical Commission Lexington Cultural Resource Survey. So we know that we can also go there to find more information on this house. However, if you go back, some of you might have noticed that while 503 is here, this is 502. You might wonder why that's there, because initially this seems to make no sense. Especially if you know where 502 Concord Avenue is, because you'll know it's currently the Payne House, which is a contemporary house built in 1958, which would seemingly have nothing to do with this house. But if you click on a photograph of 502, and there are a couple, I think. Here's another one. We notice that it's the Cutler Barn, which was located at 502 Concord Ave previously, and on the present site of 502 Concord Avenue. So in this sense, we can get even more context and information for 503, because again, when you search 503, you're going to find that it probably references 503 in the description, so that's why it shows up in the search. So as you're going through, if you find that you like this image, you can click on it, and instead of just getting the thumbnail, you're going to get the full image. You can see it a little bit more up close. And then if you decide you'd like to request a copy of this image, you can click that little button down there, and this will come up. It's an image request form, and you can see the different sizes and prices available if you'd like to have a digital image sent to you. You can fill out this form, and one of us will be in touch with you in the archives. And like I said, while most of the items that we have available on specific houses are photographs, if you'd like to continue researching a particular person or family that lived in the house, or the architect of the house, or the time period the house was built, you can definitely make an appointment to come and visit the archives. We're currently located at Hancock Clark House, which is at 36 Hancock Street. And I think you saw a picture of it earlier. And because we're such a small staff, we do accommodate researchers by appointment only. If you are a member of the Historical Society, you can visit the archives and do research for free, which is awesome. And if you're not a member, we do offer 30 minutes of preliminary staff time to researchers at no charge to get you started, see if we even have anything for you to continue researching. And then after 30 minutes, you can utilize the archives for a $35 research fee, or you can become a member. And I think that's about all I have to say. So again, feel free to grab these rack cards over here. They'll give you some information on the archives, and I'd like to turn it over to Yates.
As told, I work for the Office of the Town Clerk. My name is Lee Yates. I'm both the archivist and the records manager. And my responsibilities include looking after our physical collection of archival material. They're down in the basement of Cary Hall, a wonderful facility that the town renovated a few years ago. I'm also responsible for some of the scanned documents that are in the town's public records portal, and I'm here to tell you about the portal. The public records portal is the town's online collection. It includes modern day documents and also historic documents going way back, not only to 1713 when the town was incorporated, but some of them go back to 1692 because at the time the community got permission to become a parish, to build its own church, which was a necessity to become an independent community. So way back, you can see these things online. And of course, you can do this all in the comfort of your own kitchen while wearing your PJs at any hour of the day or night. It's a boon both to researchers and insomniacs alike. So to get there, you want to start at the town's website. This is the main website. It's lexingtonma.org. And if you look off to the left here, there are these blue boxes. The one that says Town Government. If you look down at the bottom, there's an entry that says Public Records. So if you click on that, you go to this page, which gives you background information on what is in the archives and in the town's public records, both online and offline. Then when you're ready to see the online portal, you go up to the top here. All in caps, it says Access Online Public Records. And when you click that, you will go to the Public Records portal. And it does say that right up at the top next to the town seal, Public Records portal. So that's how you know you're in. And off on the left, it tells you what's in here. It's got board and committee minutes, members of boards and committees, town reports, election results, town meeting results, and it also now has, we need to add this, it has the historic archives as well. So what's going to be of interest to you as you're researching your house, or researching generally historical things? You might like to look at, up at the top, the annual town reports. And we have those going back to 1829. Before 1873, the town didn't publish an all-in-one town report like we have now. Before that, each committee published its own little booklet for its annual reports. So we have those going back, some of them to 1829. Our collection isn't entirely complete, but we do have a lot there. And then it goes on right up into the present day, and somebody got a little ambitious and even put a heading for 2020 to 2029. I don't think there's anything there yet. But I encourage you to browse around, particularly in the older sections. You'll find some fascinating information. But what I really am here to tell you about is my own little area of expertise, the historic archives. And one thing you need to know about these is these are handwritten materials. So there's a limited amount of online searching you can do. There is a search feature in on the town site. But for the historic archives, mostly you'll be looking up the titles of these documents, and the dates are included in the archives. But if you understand that, you'll find some wonderful, wonderful materials. And so when you go back out to the public records portal, down toward the bottom, it says Historic Archives, no text search. That's just a reminder. Up at the top is the search box where you can search all of these things. So if you click on Historic Archives, you go to this page, and we have these folders. Up at the top, there's a listing that says Items of Special Interest. If you're browsing around, I made a list of some things that are particularly interesting that you might just enjoy for its own sake. But what in here is going to be helpful to you? I should say for the Town Records Portal overall, it's a work in progress. Some sections are more complete than others, but new additions are being made every day. There's a big push on to get as much of the town's records into the Public Records Portal to make them available to you. So the thing I think that will be of most interest to you, well, for one thing, there are the town meeting records down at the bottom, the older ones, going back, as I say, to 1692. Fascinating materials in there. But for specific lookups, the section called Assessment and Taxation will probably be very helpful to you, because right from the beginning, the town kept lists of everybody's property that was taxable. Of course, a big concern of the town, you had to tax, tax, tax. So if you go in there, you see lists going back to 1729, assessments and taxes. Assessments were lists of everybody's property that was taxable, what exactly they owned, buildings, land, livestock, and a few of the earliest ones also include listings for slaves. You can see who was being taxed on owning slaves. It kind of makes your hair stand on end. And these go on up until 1915 was the latest of the handwritten ones that we have. So we've been following 503 Concord Road. So to see what might be available, the later listings are more complete. So I went over to the 1905 valuation list. Off on the left, this is a book, and the left, it shows you pages in the book. You can scroll down and click on any page you want. This book has people listed alphabetically by last name. It's not by street address, it's by last name. So I said to myself, who owned that property in 1905? Well, if you look in that listing from the Cultural Resources Survey that Marilyn put up, it will tell you that at the time the property belonged to Clarence H. Cutler. So I opened the book and I scrolled down to his name, and sure enough he's there. I know this is a little hard to read, I'll tell you what it says, but up at the top it says Clarence Cutler H. Gives his address as Concord Avenue, and you note that there are no house numbers. At the time, people weren't so concerned with house numbers if they even had them at the time. The first column is poll taxes. Any person who is eligible to vote had to pay $2 for that. The next column is livestock. He had 5 horses, 30 cows, and 1 bull, and off to the side where you can't, it doesn't show here, the value of those livestock. And then continuing on across the page, we have listings for buildings, and at that time he was taxed for 1 house at $2,500, 1 barn at $2,000, and 1 outbuilding at $250. It doesn't say what kind of outbuilding it might have been. It could have been anything. The next column is land. He was taxed on 51 acres of mowing and tillage, 43 acres of pasture, and 41 acres of woodland. And the prices, the values of those are off on the right. They don't show here. And if you browse around, you'll see he was really well off compared to his neighbors. He was quite the prosperous fellow. So what happened later? I went over to the last book we have, which is in 1915. And he still owned the property at that time. So once again, he had about the same amount of livestock. I didn't bother to put that up. He had over here in the land column, he had the same acreage that he had before, but he's also added a property called the O'Brien land, 16 3/4 acres. I don't know where that was. Not necessarily contiguous to the rest. He still had the house, barn, and outbuilding with the same valuation, but he's added something. He now is being taxed on a windmill worth $100. And we don't know if it was on his house, by his house, or on some other part of his property. Back then, it wasn't unusual for a property owner to put in a windmill, to pump water out of the well up to a cistern in the attic to provide water pressure for running water through the house. So my best guess would be that that's what he was using it for. I can't prove it. He might have been using it to pump water for his cows off in the field. But if you wanted to look through the valuations for the lands times between 1905 and 1915, you could probably figure out exactly when that windmill went up. Wouldn't it be cool to know that your house once had a windmill on it? So this is a very quick look at the town's public records portal with the modern day documents and historic documents. So I urge you to go and take a look at that. And I'm sure you'll find some things that are really fascinating. We're very fortunate that we're able to put all these up online, especially the historic documents. Starting in 2009, the town began voting CPA, Community Preservation Act funding for us to reserve these documents so that we have them. It's a wonderful collection, and now on top of that, we've got them scanned and online. And we put up something like 60,000 pages of them this year. So I hope you'll take a look at that. So thank you.
Before we start the questions, could I just add one thing? Sure.
One thing that none of us talked about, because it's not really a town resource, but if all else fails, I wanted to let you know that you can do deed research by getting yourself to the Middlesex County of Deeds. You know your own deed book and page number because you theoretically have a copy of it. Well, you can go back and forth. If you read your deed will say, being that property identified on book something, page something. So you go to the Registry of Deeds and find that deed, and it will tell you where it came from. And you go back again, and you go back. And it takes some time. It's fun. The books are musty and hidden, but it's a great way of finding out a lot closer to when your house actually was built, because it'll also say, it may say, I deed to you the property at 503 Concord Avenue, but then it also may say, I deed to you the property plus house at Concord Avenue, or the land plus house, and that will be your clue that at some time between this deed and the one before it, a house was built.
What's the site?
It's not on, well, some of the Middlesex deeds are online, but the more recent ones, but the oldest, you actually have to go in person to the Middlesex County, it's in Cambridge, the Middlesex County Courthouse on
East Cambridge Street,
Third Street? Cambridge?
Third Street.
Yeah. Third Street. I think it is Third Street. I'm going to have you hold that microphone. I'll read the questions in one microphone, and then you can pass that one to whoever's the best to answer a question. So, the first question that we have is, how can we access some of the references, in particular that Anne had mentioned, Bicknell's Village something builder and Asher Benjamin pattern books? And I do want to say, before I have Anne answer this, we are going to put all of this material together on a web page within our website. So anything that we have shown you today will be accessible through our website, hopefully within a couple of weeks. It does take some time to collate the content and then build the site, but we do plan to put it up there. And now I'll let you mention the pattern books and the Village Builder.
Well, the first thing I would do is to look at the Cary Library catalog or the rest of the Minuteman Library to see if they had an architectural book from around the period.
Can't hear you.
I can't hear you. Hold it like this, right in.
Oh, okay. So the first thing I would do is I would look at the Minuteman catalog and look at the possible, I don't know if you could do a subject for architectural books, but in any case, for the ones that I mentioned the name of, and this will be up on the website, you can see if there are any copies in the Minuteman Library Network, and not just Lexington. And then I would go to the web and look up the various ones and try to see if they're online. There are a lot of them online. Google Books, and just a plain search will bring them up. And so that's what I would suggest.
And I know Anne can't see because this is behind her, but being a librarian, I was very curious, so I did my own little search while she was talking. And if you look in the library's catalog for Asher Benjamin, there are multiple resources that come up. So you could take a look and see what we have through the Minuteman Network right from there. The next question is, are there any old maps that show topographical features such as wetlands, elevation, etc.? And I think Linda might be the best person to answer that.
We do have some topo maps in the Worthen and Cary Library collections, and we could look through those first, and then if we don't have exactly what you're looking for, we could track that down either from a town department or county or state or whatever it might be. But we would absolutely help you track down what you're looking for. Ask a librarian.
I have to let everybody know that this program happened and that we kept promoting Ask a Librarian, so we're all prepared in the next couple of weeks. The next question, we probably won't have a lot of answers for this. It's the kind of thing where we were using 503 Concord Ave today as an example. This is another address that somebody could enter in and follow the same steps that we just did. But in case any of you have any knowledge off the top of your head, I'm going to throw this out. The address is 12 Childs Road, and the comment on the card is, I've been told that a previous owner, Louise Lund, was known as the Doll Lady. That's all I know, but would like to know more. It's the perfect kind of question to bring to the library, or start with the Cultural Resources Survey and then look in the Historical Society's site. But do any of you have any knowledge off the top of your head?
No, but I want to go look into this question, because this is the kind of question reference librarians live for, and we don't get that often.
It's what makes the job really fun, because you never know what kind of a question you're going to get. And so I've gone home to my kids sometimes and been like, guess what I was asked today? And they're like, what does that even mean? I'm like, I don't know, but it was really fun. So whoever sent that question, if you want to stop in or follow some of these steps and walk through it with us, we'd be happy to do that. Are there historic newspapers that can be searched for information on houses? So I know we have some in our library collection. We definitely have the Minuteman back to, do you remember the year?
It's 1871.
That's what I thought.
We've got the Minuteman, we've got Historic Globe, etc. That would be it could end up being a pretty deep research project, which we would love to get involved with, because they're not necessarily indexed. I mean, the newspapers we have in the Worthen collection, they aren't indexed at all. So it would take some research, but it's definitely something we could try to help with. Do you have?
I was going to say, I think the library has it on microfilm. Is that correct? We have quite a few copies, with the occasional year missing, of the Minutemen in large bound volumes that you can come down to the archives and flip through. Microfilm might be a little bit easier if you're just scrolling for a name or an address, but we do have.
How far back do you have?
I think into the 1800s, and again, it's kind of, when it gets that far back, it's hit and miss. And I know that we're pretty much every year from like 1940 maybe on 1930. I know we're missing some key years like 1975, but for the most part, we do have every year, and I think the library does too. And that might just be easier to quickly scroll through.
The Boston Globe online is also was mentioned. It's a wonderful resource, and it's fully indexed, absolutely everything, even right down to the tiny little classified ads. So you might be able to find a real estate ad for your house or your neighborhood.
The challenge with newspapers is that they're not always indexed, so a lot of the very early stuff, you kind of have to scroll through. It's kind of a manual search. But if you can use the Globe to determine the date that you want to be looking at in the Minuteman, or if you can use any other clues to find, to narrow down your date range, that makes it a little bit easier. If all you know is the year, it can take a while to scroll through the microfilm. But we do have a new microfilm reader upstairs that is much clearer and easier to read, and you can print directly from it, so you can take those resources with you. But that is the challenge, that they're not indexed. There's a second question on this card. How can you best establish when additions or changes were made to a home's footprint? In this case, the home was built in 1808. I don't know if that makes a difference in the resources available.
Well, one place you could go is to the town's housing department in the town office building down in the basement. They have permits and things like that, and they also have some floor plans. And I was asked how far back do the floor plans go, and the young person I was talking to said, oh, they go way back to the 1950s. But permits go back much farther than that.
And if your house is on the Cultural Resources Survey, it should say, because part of the research in preparing the front page of that form is there's a line for any additions, and it may also be in the architectural description of the form that says when any additions were made to the house.
Thank you. This is a very specific question. Is there a map of the Potter Pond Golf Course? Would like to see where the tees and holes were. Does anybody know that off the top of their head?
I don't know, but I'd like to find out. And again, that would be a question to either, call the reference desk, stop by, or email. So we can help you look into it.
Well, I strongly suspect that the building department would have that. Something like that would have had to been submitted, so they might be able to find it for you. The Conservation Commission, yes, thank you.
That's a good point. It's important to remember that while the library is a great repository for a lot of information, other town departments also have materials. And so part of the point of today's event was to let you know what those other town departments are, but also to give you some idea of how to reach them. Because everybody has different hours. The library is probably open the latest. But if they're, like Elizabeth had some recommendations on how to reach the Historical Society, to call and make an appointment, things like that. So one of the takeaways for today is just knowing who you can talk to and when they're available. You can't just walk over to Cary Hall and get into the archives. You have to call ahead and make an appointment because it's a little bit complicated to get in there. So the process isn't one where you can just drop what you're doing and walk somebody into the basement. So it's partly just to raise some awareness of how to access the resources. So this is a question about whether any work has been done to synthesize all of this historical data into a GIS system. And I know the town website has some kind of GIS, but I don't know a lot about it. I don't know how historical it is or what it includes.
There was some talk several years ago about keying things like the inventory forms to the GIS map. I don't think it's been done yet. It would be a good idea, but I don't think it's, last I looked, I don't think it had been done.
So the person asking this question is interested in helping with such a project. Would you be the best person to contact for that? Or who would be the right person?
I would say whoever manages the GIS map.
Okay.
Is that, do you know, would that be Kathy Santos, the webmaster?
I don't know, but she would know.
Kathy Santos, the webmaster, could help you find the right place to go for that. Or if not, well, the people I were talking to were people in the Conservation Commission because they wanted to map both conservation areas as well as the historical areas in town. So they might know something. Karen Mullins.
For the person who asked that question, I'd go to Conservation and I'd go to Kathy Santos at Town Hall. Okay. And thank you in advance for volunteering. This is a question for the Lexington Historical Society. If I build a federal house style, will this house be entered into the protection of the Historical Society even though it's built in the 21st century?
No, misunderstand. That's
Not the society. The society doesn't protect houses. The society documents houses. If you want protection, if the house is in the historic districts, you have protection under the historic districts provisions. If it's outside of the district and it's on the inventory, then you have limited protection from the Historical Commission. And that would be, but it's limited to a 12-month demolition delay period if the developer bought your house and wants to tear it down. If it is a really significant house that has slipped under the radar and is not on the inventory and is not in a historic district, we'd like to know about it.
But if you build it new.
Pardon me?
But if you build it new, it's a brand new house.
It's a brand new house.
Well, I thought that was the
old
question.
style.
The question is, if I build a new house in an old style, is it
I'm sorry.
protected? And the answer would be no, because it's a new house.
Because it's a new house.
If my house had a windmill, can I rebuild one on my property now, or will the zoning department not permit it? I would think you'd have to go to the zoning department to ask that.
I think if it were a pre-existing structure that, and it's still there, or you can prove that it was always there, you may be able to pass go and build your windmill. But an 18th century windmill is a little bit different than the stuff that they're building today. You would definitely have to have a conversation, or I would hope you'd have a conversation if you wanted to build one of these things that flip around and make noises and emit all kinds of things.
I think that the relevant answer to that question is that we can help you find photographs or documentation about whether there was a windmill on your property, but in terms of being able to build one today, you'd have to go to town hall. This question's very general, so I'm not sure exactly what the person's looking for. The question is, how about U.S. Census data? Census data is available online. Librarians can help you navigate it and find what's there. I don't know if there's, more detail to the question. Do you want to add to it?
Yeah, the fact is, if you go back far enough, U.S. Census data will not have an address. So because it's just the trail that the census taker took when they knocked on doors. So going back a certain amount of time, you can't sort of go to a census data and say, Fred whatever used to own my house, because the address won't be there.
So
you can search the census data by name, yeah. And I would recommend going to the archives over on Trapello Road, the National Archives. They are very helpful, and they're underused now that there's so many things online.
Does the library have a subscription to any genealogical service? I can't even think what they're called.
Ancestry and all that?
Yeah,
sure.
Ancestry.com?
Yeah.
So you can use your library card to access their database to go that route.
Sure.
And actually, Linda had thought about, she was prepared to present on all of our genealogical resources as well, but I told her we weren't going to have time for all of her passion today. But you can use genealogy as a way also of finding clues about who lived in your house. It's another way of getting some context around something like that. So I'm going to allow one more question, and then, like I said, we do have an event this afternoon, so that will wrap it up. But I will say that if you have more questions after today, stop in the library, give us a call, send us an email, take some of the information from the side table. We're happy to answer questions at later dates and happy to help you through the research. So our last question is, it's a question about inconsistencies on the date of a home's construction. If somebody was told that their house dates back to 1790 and the Cultural Resources Survey says 1849, what might account for that discrepancy?
Well, the first thing I would say, and this doesn't go back quite that far, but the assessor's dates are approximations. So I would never use the assessor's date as the firm date. I would find out from other sources that we've been talking about closer. Sometimes it's style. An 1840 house was built in a very different style than a 1790 house. And that would be a visual clue, although there might be 1790 elements of a property that was finally, that was identified as 1840. If you went up to the attic and looked at the beams, for example, you might find that the guts of the house, the core of the house, is much older and has been modified over the years by adding porches and L's and chimneys and bay windows and things. So that could be one of the reasons of discrepancy. But I think I would rather you rely on the later date than the earlier date, because when the houses are put on the inventory, they are very carefully researched by professionals in the field who have done the groundwork so that you don't have to. And if they say it's 1840, you know, for bragging rights, 1790 sounds a lot more interesting, but it may not have been. And I think sometimes the responsibility of the consultant that's doing the work is to unravel those discrepancies and find out exactly what's going on.
I just want to say something about my earlier discussion about architectural books. I will, when we post my talk online, add footnotes and references, and maybe in a bibliography put some additional information about pattern books.
Thank you very much, Anne. Before we totally wrap this up, Laurel would just like to come back with a couple of closing statements. And I just wanted to personally thank all of the panelists, myself, because this was my idea. I'm relatively new to the library. And I said, oh, this would be a great way for me to learn a whole bunch of stuff. And so these 5 women have very generously given so much time and their knowledge so that I could learn a little bit. I hope that you've all learned a little bit. But ladies, I truly appreciate all of the time you put into this, and thank you so much for being here.
We would like to extend warmest regards and thank you to our panelists this morning, and we would like to give you library bags. Linda will do the honors. Thank you very, very much. Also, a special thank you to the Hospitality Committee. They did such a wonderful job. Thank you. And also to the Friends volunteers. Pam is here. And also to Christine, because she championed this idea, and it's been an incredible program. And finally, to the audience, the program was really meant to help you assist you in filling in the blanks and putting the puzzle pieces together. So we want to offer you good luck with your search. We're so glad that you've been here. And again, there are some takeaway materials and also what Linda has put together here. So have a good weekend, and thanks for being here.